Hey everybody, welcome back again to Ken Tamplin Vocal Academy, where the proof is in the singing. I'm doing this really fun series where I'm taking isolated vocal stems or isolated vocal tracks, solo vocals, and I'm breaking them down. I'm doing a tutorial, an analysis, and I'm showing you how the recording process was done for you audiophile engineers out there or you singers that want to make your vocals sound better. I'm going to show you how to do that, okay? Next up is Chris Cornell, Audioslave. The song is Like a Stone. Before we get started, if you don't mind, please like and subscribe to my channel. That would be really cool. And I have a singing course. The course is called How to Sing Better Than Anyone Else. You can find it right here at kentamplinvocalacademy.com. I also have a free singing forum with over 20,000 singers, and they're all negotiating and talking about these kinds of ways to get great at singing. All right, so I'm going to dive right in. I'm just going to go straight for the vocal. Now, this is kind of interesting because you kind of need to make a judgment call on this. We're going to first talk about the vocal, how Chris sang it. I'll give you a tutorial on the singing part. But when it gets to the recording part, you got to decide if you want it to sound more affected or really intimate and really up and in your face. So we're going to do both of those so I can show you how exactly to do that. And then you kind of decide if you want to add maybe effect only in the chorus or less effect in the verse, and so forth, or keep all the effect in all the time. It's up to you. But anyway, we're going to talk about the voice first. Let's do this. Here we go.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness.
Now, we've talked about Chris's technique a lot, and I've done a lot of tutorials on Chris, but I want to talk about this one because this one's really unique to a lot of his singing. He's singing it more kind of like almost like a ballad, but not quite, like a mid-tempo ballad, so to speak. So, on a cobweb in the afternoon, right? So he still has that closed mouth, a marble mouth closed thing. Let's go through this really closely, a line at a time, so you guys can do this with me. And this is maybe his easiest or one of his easiest songs to sing. I think that's why it has a lot of views on YouTube, because a lot of people can see themselves doing this, and we actually get to see Chris do it up close and personal as a solo vocal track. Check it out.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness.
On a cobweb in the afternoon in a room full of emptiness, right? So he's not using much vibrato or anything like that. And I could really, if I really wanted to dissect this, I could get it to sound almost exactly like it. I could put it up there and you'd go, is that Chris? Is that not Chris? That's not quite the point of this. But so you can hear, though, he has a real crystal clear tone. So ping is king. Remember, I cover all this in my singing course. We isolate all this stuff and we learn how to do all this stuff in my singing course. So on a cobweb in the afternoon, I confess. Right? I know it's not the wrong lyric back. But you hear the tone, the brightness of the tone as it comes in. Let's continue.
Just by a freeway, I confess I was lost in the pages.
By a freeway, I confess I was lost in the pages, right? He's got that Cornell tone that's just bright, a little distorted, some kind of flavor to the sound, right? Now, how we get that sound, I want to sound like that. It's just a lot of years of singing, and especially a lot of years of kind of singing heavy. So it gives him, the luxury of a maturation of the voice over time to have that kind of tone. So don't be bummed if you can't go straight to this kind of sound and your voice sounds kind of monotone and you don't love it because your voice sounds, kind of vanilla, just real sterile, so to speak. This happens over time where we work our voices and we sing a lot, and this is how we get this kind of tone. So I cover that in my course as well, but let's continue. By the way, there's a little glitch in the track where it misses a little piece of the vocal, so if you could bear with that, here we go.
Book full of death, reading I will die alone, and if we're good, we'll lay to rest anywhere we wanna go.
Now, before we get to the next section, he's not using very much diaphragmatic support, but I believe in this case he's doing it deliberately. Now, I know in the video it has him sitting down singing with a microphone. He might have actually done that when he did this song, because it sounds like the kind of vocal you just kind of you're in your living room, you're kind of singing it to family and friends. You got your acoustic, so he's got real kind of, you can hear pinch and squeeze in the throat. Emptiness. Hey, right? He's got it kind of squeezed in the sound, so he's not supporting that. But then when he goes into more towards the chorus parts, he does dig in. He does, hey, hey, hey! And he brings in some of that roaring lion that we know and love and appreciate about Chris. So check it out.
In your house, long to be.
So now let's do this together. He's still close in the sound with that nice bright tone, but in your house, I'm alone to be. Right? He's actually not that distorted on it, but he's coming in and he's leaning in a little bit, and it's a very deliberate governing of his normal sound, of him being kind of balls out. He's going out of his way just to sing this with temperance and just to have a lot of control in the sound, so he's just not overwhelming us with his normal big roaring lion growly distorted voice, which is a lot of respect to that, because it's not easy to do that, because I've talked a lot about that. Most people that if the only way they know how to get to certain notes is with distortion, they forever sentence themselves to always having to use distortion to get to those notes, and he's proving that he doesn't need to do that. So let's continue.
Room by room, patiently.
Now, we talked about plosives. Patiently, right? He's got this big, so again, another engineering mistake. So we're listening going, if you guys think that all these recordings are all perfect all the time and everything was dissected perfectly, maybe in the Pro Tools world with a lot of auto-tune and the crap that goes on today, but for actual real recording, honest, real recording, there are mistakes. And we just heard it on the plosive, but patiently, right? Now, the other thing Chris does is he uses his vibrato very judiciously. I think the reason he did that is because in the grunge era and these bands, these guys, Alice in Chains, these other bands didn't want to be associated necessarily with Nirvana. So they didn't want to be associated with the Washington grunge sound, though they were kind of all at that same time. So they got lumped into that camp a little bit, though these guys didn't want to do that. But because of that, to have a modern rock vocal sound, we've talked about this a lot, was to cover the sounds whenever you're singing. It kind of covered, everything had kind of an R in the sound. You can really hear that in Chris, right? But was also to be kind of monotone on the vocals and not to use a lot of vibrato and to not use a lot of blues licks. And the interesting thing is, Chris gives it away that he's got some soul in his voice, because now and then he'll kind of drop a soul lick or a blues lick and you go, oh, so he can. And guitar players did the same thing, so did drummers, but guitar players didn't do any flashy stuff in the grunge era. They kept it real, drony and groany, and they didn't try to show off a lot of dexterity. Now, they did, again, we talked about Alice in Chains or bands like that, where they did use a lot of Led Zeppelin kind of chord changes and whatnot. So they did reach back to some, 70s and 80s sounding stuff, but they didn't go all the way to the extent of over vibratoing notes or using a lot of vibrato, singing pretty monotone, singing with a close covered sound. Guitar players, almost sometimes guitars a little out of tune, and not a lot of real tight guitar playing, so to speak. Well, this was true of singing also. So we see Chris, sort of a wink and a nod, so to speak, or caving in a little bit to the grunge sound so that he could still sound modern and then still sometimes let it out. But look, the cat was already out of the bag. Sorry for talking so much. The cat was already out of the bag. With the range that he had, no one was singing with the range that he did and with the same kind of distortion that he had. So you could already kind of tell that he was a little more on the 80s metal side, singing more like a grunge guy than a grunge guy singing like an 80s metal guy. Does that make sense? All right, let's continue.
I'll wait for you there like a stone.
I love that. Like a stone. I love that. That open A. That's the open throat technique, guys, that we talk about. Try it with me right now. Go high. Go ah. It's the la ah. Open up that throat. Drop your tongue to the base of the jaw. Go like a stone. Ah. Ha. Ah. High. right? We're going to open up that sound. But remember, go back to my my tutorials on diaphragmatic support. You have to have the strength in the stomach to sustain that sound, or it'll sound like this. Like a stone. Instead of like a stone, right? More on the Dio side or the Cornell side. And you know, you hear Ray Gillen, a lot of other people that had that kind of tone too. But I wanted to point that out because you can really hear his diaphragm kicking in to open up the throat, to relax the throat, to stay nice and open, and then give us that distortion too, to lean into that sound with glottal compression. We talk a lot about how to get that distortion. In my singing course, it's called glottal compression, compressing air at the glottis. And I have another term. I coined most of these phrases. Glottal compression is an old bel canto term. And everybody's saying, have you ever heard of glottal compression, Ken? Yeah, like I've been talking about it for like 30 years. You know, yes. But I coined another phrase, hyperglottal compression, which isn't just the concept of holding the breath when you sing for bel canto, beautiful singing. It's hyperglottal compression of actually pushing air to the glottis to fatigue and distort the chords themselves to get this distortion safely, okay? Big, big, big difference. And if you don't know how to do open throat technique, you can't get to that technique safely. So you gotta learn a clean tone and open throat first in order to be able to lean into the sound like this safely, okay? A lot of info.
Wait for you there.
Now, what I love about this part right here is the pitch is so spot on. And remember me talking about a lot about when you cover the sound as you go down in a descending scale. I always say never darken or cover or color a descending passage because there's a tendency to go flat. It almost sounds auto-tuned, but it's not. You can hear it because you can't hear the auto-tune kicking in, and you can hear a little tiny bit of the anomalies going back and forth. But listen to how clean the pitch is on this. Check this out.
Wait for you there alone.
Now, wait for you there alone. Right? He's really clean on his pitch, and that's another thing I just loved about Chris, where a lot of guys are pretty shaky on their pitch. That's not Chris, okay? So, let's continue.
And on my deathbed, I will pray to the gods and the angels like a pagan, to anyone who will take me to heaven.
See, he's real light. Heaven. He's got that real light tone, but because he's already sung heavy a lot in his life, he's got that cool sound, so he can get away with it without heaven. Really, you know, a real sterile kind of sound. It's heaven with a little air. Heaven. Hear that kind of air? So he's using air, but he's compressing the air to get that tone, which is really awesome.
To a place I recall, I was there so long ago. The sky was bruised.
By the way, notice his breath control there too. To a place I recall, I can hold my breath for days and keep singing. Like, you know, he has really good breath control. That's another key to being able to tell how well he's using glottal compression, because he can sing these long phrases. A lot of people say, oh, I can't sing that long phrase because I don't have the lung capacity. No, actually, he's not using a lot of lung capacity. He's controlling the breath. Yeah, 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 yeah. Right? He's literally compressing the air. That's what I just did. If you tried that at home, you'd probably go, oh man, I'm already out of breath. That's because I'm holding back the breath. I cover that in my singing course also. And that's the key to get good distortion with good open throat technique and being able to manage the breath and not overuse air to dry out the chords that makes your chords go hoarse, okay?
To a place I recall, I was there so long ago. The sky was bruised, the wine was bled, and there you led me
Now it's kind of gone half-mast. In your house, I long to be. Right, in fact, I'm more distorted than he is, but you know, he's stepping off the gas. He's not like the normal Chris, like Cochise or something, you know. I'm not a murderer. You know, he's not like doing that sound. He's governing the sound and he's pulling it back and he's singing it like a mid-tempo ballad, which is really awesome.
Round by round, patiently, I'll wait for you there, like a stone.
Now, I want to point out something else. I talked to you guys a lot about vocal tract shaping. And again, we're not going to be able to get you guys to do this in one video. So please don't expect that. Just know that I've got a lot of tutorials out about vocal tract shaping. I cover it very extensively in my singing course. If you listen back to his vocals, and the higher up he goes, the more this is true, that the throat itself is moving off the vowels ever so slightly. He's not going, hey, bamboo, ni na, right? It's almost the same vowel over and over again with very little subtle changes. Listen closely.
Like a stone, I'll wait for.
Right? Way there like a stone. Right? So he's using very little, or he's changing the throat very little, and it's all based off the ah vowel. Folks that are doing my course, all vowel sounds stem from it's the la, ah, right? So you hear him do this, a very little change and exchange in the throat, because that doesn't fatigue the throat. It just, the throat needs to, okay, learn this one vowel, and then all I have to do is slight variations off that vowel in order to be able to maintain good consistency in the sound, to come back and do this, you know, over and over again with a lot of strength, a lot of stamina, a lot of endurance, sound pressure that mounts in the throat, and so forth. So very, very important, guys. I'm trying to really, really dial you into this so you really understand this stuff. Finally, where he kind of leans in a little bit more there at the very end.
Alone I read until the day was gone, and I sat in regret.
Can we go to the end? Hold on, right here.
Wander on,
Wander on, right? Kind of Glenn Hughesy a little bit, right? So that's kind of another dead giveaway as to some of his influences, because some of these influences sound like early Deep Purple to me in some spots. You know what I mean? Like you can hear that it's not just the grunge era, because when the grunge era happened, it was so kind of, I don't want to say flipping the bird at 80s metal, but it was like, we want nothing to do with that. We're going to make our own sound and keep our own sound and you know, not sound anything like 80s metal. Chris kind of married the two. You know, he took the good that he liked out of the metal scene and he brought that into modern rock at that time. So interesting harmonies too, right?
Roam by roam,
patiently, yeah, right? Almost kind of Dio a little bit, right? Listen to that.
I'll wait for you there, like a storm.
Now, he does something Glenn Hughes does where he pharyngally spits like a stone, right? So how interesting on the low notes, way on a freeway in the darkest shade, and when he's up like a stone, he's really pharyngally spread on the sound, because if he were to go like a stone, it wouldn't sound that cool, and it's really, really hard to do. So he pharyngally spreads the sound. Now, I've talked to you guys a lot about this too. As we go up, we have to open up that sound to put more mask, and pharyngally spread is a fancy word for meaning spread the more smile, a more open, widespread mouth into the sound. So here I'm doing that, man. Check it out. I'm gonna listen to it one more time.
like a storm.
Like a storm.
Wait for you there, alone.
Cool. Now I want to go back to the top. Now, so we heard that solo vocal alone, okay? So I've got it here, and it's really cool. And there is absolutely something to be said for the intimacy of not adding a lot of effects. So like I said, you can start with no effects in the verse where it's real, gentle or whatever. And then as you build up and you want a bigger sound, you could add effects where no one's even knowing you're doing this. It just sounds bigger. You don't even know why. And again, the track absorbs a lot of the effects. So you can't really hear the effects. You just know the sound's getting bigger. And you don't want to hear a lot of effects. It sounds cheesy if there's too much effect and whatever. Sometimes I over effect stuff so you can hear it when I'm doing these tutorials, so you guys can really hear how, what the effect is supposed to sound like. And then you can add or, subtract from that. But I want to go back to the top. I'm not going to do the whole song, but I want you to go back to the top, and I want you to hear this with the actual groove, with the track itself. So let me put it in.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room
Let's do this again. Sorry, here we go.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness by a freeway. I confess I was lost.
Now I'm going to bring the track up a little bit more so it's more, so his vocal isn't so far out front. Let's try this again. Here we go.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness by a freeway. I confess I was lost.
Now I added some effect to this, and I'm going to show you what effects that I added so you can kind of take a listen to it compared to the original vocal. So I'm turning off the original vocal, and I'm turning on only my vocals, and I'll explain to you what I did. We'll take a listen first, and I'll tell you what I did. Check it out.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness.
Now here's the original vocal without the effect, so here it is.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness.
Cool. Now, again, I want to re-emphasize, you may like it to be a lot more intimate without that big of a sound. So again, you can automate this where it's just intimate in the verses, and then you add more effect to make the vocals bigger in the choruses, or when he goes up higher to make it fatter. But I'm just showing you what I did. So let me explain quickly what I did. So I have two reverbs on there that are fairly short. A really short, almost plate-like sounding room, real short plate, like a plate reverb, where my pre-delay is almost nothing. It's just like around 5 milliseconds, which is almost nothing. The second reverb I have is a little bit more of a bigger room sound. Now the first one is bright with very low end, and the second reverb is a little more hall-like in nature, though it's shorter, and I have a pre-delay of about 20 milliseconds so that the reverbs don't hit at the same time. So you hear the effect of the room reverb first, the plate bright reverb, and I'm taking that reverb and I'm only using the reverb, and I'm rolling that reverb into the longer reverb. So let me say this again, explain this another way that you might understand this. I'm not taking the main vocal and just taking a bus and putting a little bit of reverb on one, a different reverb on another. I'm taking my first reverb, just the room sound that's very subtle and very small and bright, and I'm taking only the reverb, and I'm putting that reverb into the other room reverb. I'm not using any original vocal to go into the second room reverb. There's a reason for that. It mellows it out, and it takes the fatness and all of the properties of the bright reverb, and all that's being fed to the second reverb is the first reverb. Do you understand? So one reverb is feeding into another reverb with no original effect, just the reverb what the reverb effect is, okay? The reason for that is then that way the second reverb isn't overwhelmed with the main vocal itself and you're fighting reverbs. You actually have this beautiful, seamless kind of feathering from one reverb into another to make the second reverb sound like the first reverb, but also have a longer decay time in order to pull this off. I know this sounds kind of complicated, but it's really cool. So it makes it a lot more subtle. Now let me show you why this is cool. When you listen to it in the track, you won't notice this at all. Watch. I'm gonna do the original vocal with the track. Check this out.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness by a freeway.
Okay, there's that. Now let's just do my affected one with alone. Check it out.
On a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness by a freeway.
Okay, you hear how fat that sounds? Now you may say, I like it more intimate. And you may like it, that's cool, no problem. But you're gonna notice though, when the band kicks in more, now when the instrumentation is this subtle and this thin and this airy and breathy, and there's a lot of space in the instrumental track, you can hear a lot more of the effect. But when it gets heavier, and I'm gonna prove it to you, as you go up, I won't change anything, any volumes or anything, so you'll hear the exact effect. So it's not like I'm adding more or less. I'm gonna move it up to the sections where the band gets heavier, and you can decide if you like it thinner or heavier. So check this out, I'll move it right to here. All right, so here we go. Right here. Okay, now that's with effect. Let's do it without effect. So check this out. Here's without effect. Check it out. Hear how small it is? Now you may like that sound. I'm not saying you have to do this stuff, but I'm showing you if you want to get a bigger sound and make it sound more expensive and make it sound more like a record and get away from your home studio kind of sound, these are all the different effects that go into doing this. So, and I'm gonna isolate this and play this alone a second too so you can hear it without the track. So I'll A, B them back. I'll just go, here's. Now in this next section, I'm just gonna play only the vocal by itself.
I'll wait for you there.
Here we go. Then that's without effect. Here's with effect.
I'll wait for you there.
Okay, and when he goes up high, like on some of the heavier stuff, I think it's around here.
Round by round, patiently, I'll wait for you there.
Okay, now here's without any effect. Check it out.
Patiently,
How much smaller that is.
wait for you there. Like a stone.
Okay, so you can see as you go back and forth between this, how much of this matters. Now again, you may just automate this only for the chorus or hey, and he does that stuff and it sounds rah, really big rather than you know, if it didn't have the same effect on it. So there's a lot that goes into this stuff, gang. Hopefully this was helpful and check out my next video.